Greetings, Great 12 learners. My name is Mr. Simbi and welcome to today's accounting lesson. In today's class, I'm going to be talking cost accounting. Here are my objectives. By the end of the lesson, we will address cost accounting calculations, that is the preparation of the production cost statement. I'll also look at the abridged statement of comprehensive income as well as break-even calculations and analysis. Here are some keywords and language. Fixed cost, costs that do not change with the level of production, such as rent or salaries. With variable cost, costs that vary, that is, costs that change with the level of production, like your raw materials. Factory overheads, these are indirect costs incurred during the production process that cannot be directly traced to a specific product. Here are some critical common errors. And here is the exam writing competences. Dear learners, let us go for an ad break and I'll see you shortly. Welcome back from the ad break. We will now begin to look at calculations that pertain to cost accounting. Here is some content and skills problem. In grade 10, you were introduced to concepts that relate to your cost accounting. What is direct material cost? It is the cost of raw materials that is used in the production of goods. In grade 11, that concept was also taught, and in grade 12, you still have to understand what is your direct material cost. With me here, I have calculations that we're going to do together. Make sure you have a calculator and that you're also able to write. Okay, let's begin. So here we're told, calculate the direct material cost. All right? And here we are given amounts from 2022, so that becomes my opening stock here, and I also have amounts from 2023. Okay, so I know there are several ways in which one would have done this, but I'm going to use one of the methods to get this one. So I'm going to come and say my opening stock, all right? So I'll say my opening stock, which is 37,600. Then I'll say plus purchases, and my purchases is 555,000. But I know that there were raw materials valued at 21,000 which were returned to the supplier. So I'll come and say minus 21,000 here. All right? And then that would mean that I would now remain with 534,000. So here I would have 534,000 here. So I've said opening stock plus purchases. If I had carriage, I was going to add the carriage as well. And then I'm just going to say minus closing stock. And my closing stock was given, which is 58,560, which is here 58,560. That is going to give me the cost of raw materials issued for production. That is 513,040. 513,040. That is how you do that calculation. I would then take that amount and put it in my production cost statement. So I'll come in and say direct material cost. That is going to be 513,040. The next one, I'm going to look at direct labor cost. Here is some content and skills problem. Direct labor cost It is the wages or salaries paid to workers who are directly involved in the production of goods or services. So they are working on the product, directly on the product. And here we are given some information. And we're supposed to calculate our direct labor cost. And we are told the information extracted from the production wages records. Net wage paid to workers. So this is your net wages. And here you are given total deductions, which is 22% of gross wages. It is very important to note that when we are preparing our production cost statement, we need to record our gross wages, and then we add our contributions as well. It is our gross wages together with our contributions. In this case, we were not given the contributions, but we know that we need to calculate the gross. So that gross, in order to get it, it is 100 over. We have been told that this is net wage. We know that the net, it is 100, which is your gross, minus deductions, which is 22. That means we now have the net, which is 78%. So this 647,400 is equal to 78%. So what we want is 100, but what we have is 78%. And then we then say this multiply by 647,400. And then that will give us our direct labor cost. So we will now say over here, what I want is 100 and what I have is 78. I multiply that by 647,400 and that will give me 830,000. So come here, then I'll say 830,000. That would therefore become my direct labor cost. So I would then come, remember, we had our direct material cost, which was your 513,040. We calculated that one. Now I have direct labor cost, which is 830,000. That will give me what I now call prime cost. How do I get prime cost? I'll now say my 830,000 plus 513,040. And then I end up with 1,343,040. So I'll record that on my prime cost, 1,343,040. 1,343,040. Okay. Let us now move on to factory overheads. Here is some content and skills problems. Factory overhead cost. It is indirect cost associated with manufacturing a product that cannot be directly traced to a specific product or job. And with us here, we have some transactions and we have to do the corrections. And we are given the factory overhead note over here. So let us then begin. We are told the bookkeeper calculated the following cost for the year ended 28 February. And then we are given 520,280. It was discovered that she did not take the following into account. The telephone account of 22,400 was posted in error to the factory overhead cost. This expense relates to the office. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to now say telephone. So this telephone amount of 22.4 was posted in error to the factory. So I'll come and subtract it, minus 22,400. It was not supposed to be under the factory overhead amounts. So I will subtract it. Number two, We've done that one. Let's come to this one. The entire amount of rent, which is 98,400, was posted to the factory overhead cost. This expense should have been split in the ratio 7:2:1 between the factory, the sales and administration department. So I'll come here and I'll say rent. So I know that in there I have added 98,400, but it is incorrect to add it that way. So I'll come and say minus 98,400. I'm taking it out. Then I'll take that 98,400, which was added incorrectly. And then I know that it should be split. I multiply now. In the ratio 7:2:1, if I add all of these, they give me 10. So I multiply this by 7/10. And then I'll now say, I want 7. And what I have is 10. And then I multiply by 98,400. And that is going to give me 68,880. That gives me 68,880. So I'll come in, then I'll say plus 68,880. And then I close my bracket. So I'll come now. Let me point the amounts nicely. So I'll now say minus 98,400 plus 68,880. And it will give me 29,520. Remember, it's a negative, so I'm coming here to say minus, do you still remember the figure? Minus 29,520, minus 29,520, like that. And then the last one says, the insurance expense of 26,400 was divided equally between the factory overhead cost and the sales department in error. So the expense of 26.4 was divided equally, all right? But that was in error. So here's my 26,400. And remember, it was divided equally. That means it was 13,200. So I would come here and I would say insurance, open bracket, I'm going to subtract 13,200 because that is what was recorded in the factory overheads. Yet 60% of this expense relates to the factory. So it should have been 26.4. Multiply that by 60%. Let's see how much that is going to give us. I would then say 26,400, multiply that by 60%. That is 15,840. 15,840. This is what was supposed to be recorded. So I'll come in then and say plus 15,840. Now I can close the bracket. So I'm now coming to say it is my 15,840 minus 13.2, and you get 2,640. 2,640. Even if you had said minus 13.2 plus 15,840, it would have still given you 2,640. Now I can get the total now, where I now say, don't forget to add the 520,280. So that is where I begin. I say 520,280. Then I say minus 22,400. Again, minus 29,520. And then lastly, plus 2,640. It gives me a total of 471,000. So that is what I end up with here, 471,000. With that 471,000, that becomes the total of our factory overheads. So I'll bring it here. Factory overhead cost, 471,000. Dear learners, let us go for an ad break and I'll see you shortly. Welcome back from the ad break. Here is some content and skills problem. We are now going to complete our production cost statement. And remember, we have already done our direct material cost, our direct labor cost, and our factory overheads. So now we have come to the bottom part of our production cost statement. And here we are given work in process stock. So work in process stock at the beginning, it is 142,000. So I'll come here, it is 142,000 here. That means I'm going to add these two amounts. And then I'll now say my 1,814,040 plus 142,000. That would then give me 1,956,040. So I'll come here, 1,956,040. And then I need to subtract work in process at the end, but I don't have it. But what I'm given is information that the business produced 39,000 units, and each one is produced at a cost of 45 Rand. So it means I'll now come here and then I'll say the 39,000 units, multiply that by 45 Rand, and that will give me 1,755,000. So I'll come here, that is my cost of production at the end, 1,755,000. So I can now calculate my work in process at the end of the year by getting the difference between this amount, 1,956,040, and the 1,755,000. Let's do that. So I'll now say my 1,956,040 minus 1,755,000. It will give me 201,040. So I'll come here, that is 201,040. There is my production cost statement completed. There are several ways in which the examiner can test you on how to complete the bottom part of your production cost statement. Make sure you are exposed to several ways of doing that. We will now look at the abridged statement of comprehensive income. Here is some content and skills problem. The abridged statement of comprehensive income provides a summary of a company's financial performance over a specific period, focusing on key figures without the detailed breakdown found in a full statement of comprehensive income. And here is some information that we were given. We are to complete an abridged statement of comprehensive income for the year ended 30 April. And here is the table that we are to complete in. So the first thing that we will do is to record our sales. But here we can see that we are not given that information. We are told that cost of production of finished goods not given. Gross profit markup is maintained at 50% on cost. So we were given gross profit, and the gross profit was 1,250,000. And here we were not given the sales or the cost of sales, but we were given markup is 50% on cost. So I can calculate either my sales or my cost of sales. Let's start with the cost of sales. We can get the cost of sales. We know that once my markup is 50%, here I'm told that this is 50%. I know my cost is always 100. Therefore, my sales was going to be 150%. So I could have got any of these ones. Let's start, as I said, with the cost of sales. So what I want is 100, and what I have is 50. Multiply that by 1,250,000. And then I close my bracket. I'll come here and I'll now say, what I want is 100, but what I have is 50. And then we multiply all of this by 1,250,000. That will give me 2.5 million. So I'll come here and I'll say my cost of sales, I know it must be in bracket, and it is 2.5 million. So I can get that one now. Very easy. I can just add my gross profit with my cost of sales, and that will give me my sales, which is 3,750,000. Or I could have said what I want is 150, what I have is 50. Then I multiply that by 1,250,000. It would have still given me the 3,750,000. Then I am told now that my selling and distribution cost, I'm going to open a bracket here now, for administration as well as selling and distribution. And I am given an amount which is 609,850. That is for selling and distribution. And I'm given 443,950 for administration. So here it's going to be 443,950. And here it's going to be your 609,850. After you've recorded your 609,850 under selling and distribution, you now come to information C, which reads, the following items must be taken into account. Administration cost includes the annual insurance premium of 22,750. However, 60% must be allocated to the factory. That means it was incorrect recording the 22,750 under administration. So I have to come and say minus 22,750. Then I know that 60% goes to the factory. That means 40% will now go to the administration. So I want 40% of the 22,750. So I'm going to come here and I'm now going to say I'm now going to say 40 over 100 multiply by 22,750. That will give me 9,100. 9,100. That is what was supposed to be recorded under administration. So I'll come in, then I'll say plus 9,100. Let me go to bullet number 2. It reads, factory overhead cost includes the full amount of rent paid, 36,300. However, this should have been allocated according to floor areas. The factory has 400 square meters, the office 120, and the shop 80. So if I add these ones, it's your 400 plus 120, that's 520, plus 80, that gives you 600. So we know that the factory will go to the factory overhead. But the office one, that is what we want. So the office is 120 over the entire, which is 600, multiplied by 36,300. Now, we'll come and we say, on our calculator, it is 120 over the 600. And then we multiply that by 36,300. And we get 7,260. The 7,260 is what will now go onto your office. We're talking administration. So we'll come here and we say plus 7,260. And we are now left with the remainder, which is 80. So remember, it is 80 over 600. Multiply that by 36,300. So I'll come here and I'll say 80 over my 600 multiply by 36,300, and that will give me 4,840. Okay, so I'll now come to selling and distribution. Then I'll say plus 4,840. Then I close the brackets. Let's close the brackets together. So when closing the brackets, we are now saying, under administration, it's 443,950. And then I subtract my 22,750. And then I add 9,100. And I add 7,260. In total, I'll get 437,560. So it becomes 437,560. Then I do the same for my selling and distribution, where I'll take my 609,850. Then I'll say plus 4,840. The total will be 614,690. 614,690. Okay, so you then add these two amounts. You can add these two amounts. They'll give you 1,052,250. 1,052,250. And then you now simply say your gross profit minus your operating expenses. And then you end up now with your net profit, which is going to be 197,750. 197,750. That becomes your net profit over there. We'll now look at the break-even point. Here's some content and skills problem. Break-even point. It is the number of units a business must sell to cover all its costs, both fixed and variable, without making a profit or a loss. Here we calculate the break-even point. You have to know the formula to calculate break-even point. There's several formulas that can be used to calculate break-even point. I'm just going to show you one, the simpler and the most common one, which is your total fixed cost over your contribution per unit. To get contribution per unit, you say selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. Okay, so to get your total fixed cost, we will now say in 2023, my fixed cost per unit is 5.40. And how many units did I produce? I produced and sold 80,000. So I multiply that by 80,000. So my total fixed cost therefore becomes 432,000. So I can say my 432,000 divided now by my selling price per unit, which is 17 Rand 80, minus my variable cost per unit, which is 11 Rand 60. 11 Rand 60. And then it gives you your break-even point, which is going to be 69,677.4 units. That becomes your break-even point. The first part requires us to calculate the direct material cost, and then we also calculate the factory overhead cost amounts and prepare the production cost statement. We'll also calculate the wastage of raw materials, and then we'll answer the questions that follow. Let's begin. Here's the information that we were provided, and this is all the information that we're going to use. Okay, so to begin, we want to calculate the direct material cost. Make sure you have your calculator with you so that it becomes easy for you when we do the calculations. For us to get our direct material cost, we are told raw material fabric to manufacture the t-shirts, fabric issued from the storeroom to the factory for production. The weighted average method is used to determine the value of the fabric. So we need to get the average price that we can then use to multiply with the raw materials that were issued to the factory. We know that 18,900 meters were issued to the factory. But what was the price per meter? We don't know that. And for us to do that, we've been told to use the weighted average method. And then, when we're doing that, we will now say, our materials available for use, which is the 958,800. So I'll take the 958,800, the materials available for use, and then I'll divide that by the meters. So it is the rands over the meters, which is 20,400. Once I do that, I'll get 47 rand. So the average price per meter is 47 rand. I'll then say, my 18,900 meters multiply by the 47 rand. And then that will give me the total, which is 888,300. 888,300. That becomes the direct material cost. There is another way that one would have used, but for the sake of time, I'll stick to this one, and then I'll move on to the next question. Let's go to the next question. In the next one, we're given information and we're required to calculate the factory overhead cost for the year. We're given an incorrect total. And then the information that we're given reads, number one, the closing stock of factory indirect materials 7,000 was omitted. That means I need to record that closing stock of indirect materials. So I'll come here and I'll say indirect materials. When indirect materials closing stock is omitted, remember if we were going to calculate, we would have said opening stock plus purchases minus the closing stock. So we did not subtract that 7,000. That's what it means. So I'll come here, then I'll say minus 7,000. We subtract the closing stock. I'll go on to the next one. And it reads, the total water and electricity cost for the year, 84,000, was included in the factory overhead. This should have been allocated as follows. So once the total, I'll come here, then I'll say my water and electricity. The entire amount of 84,000 was included. So I'll come and take out that 84,000 minus 84. And I know that that 84,000 was supposed to be recorded as 15% to the office, 25% to the selling and distribution, then 60% to the factory. So I will need 60% of that. And when I get 60% of that, that is 50,400. That means I'll come in, then I'll add 50,400. And then I can close my bracket, and then I'll get the difference, which is 33,600. Remember, in brackets, because you're saying minus 84 plus 50.4. And then the third one reads, factory insurance of 45,000 was allocated according to the old ratio of 3:1:2 for the factory, sales, and office respectively. It should have been allocated according to the floor space as follows. Okay? So, we understand that factory insurance of 45 was allocated according to the old ratio. So, that means here, the amount we're given, the 45,000, is an amount that was in the factory. So, we are coming here and we're going to take it out. We take that one out. 45,000 minus from the factory. But we know that that 45,000 was not the entire amount. So we need to know what was the entire amount before it was split. Here they say it in the ratio 3:1:2. So if I add that, that gives me 6. Yet the factory was getting 3. So that means I have to get 6/3. And then if I punch that on my calculator, I'll get 90,000. This was the entire insurance amount, which I would then apportion according to the square meters which are given. The factory 1.5, sales 300, and office 600. So if I add all of these ones, I'll end up now with 2,400 square meters. And I know that my factory is taking 1.5 of the 2.4 square meters. And then when I punch that in the calculator, I will get an amount that is, let's do it together. We will now say 1.5, 1,500 over 2,400. And then we multiply by 90,000. That will give me 56,250, 56,250. So I'll come in, then I'll say plus 56,250, and then I close the bracket. That will then give me 11,250. Then I can get the total correct amount for factory overhead cost, which is going to be 570,650. That becomes the final amount. Okay, so I can come here now. Remember, I already have my direct material cost. I have that one, my direct material cost. We calculated that one, which was 888,300. And my direct labor cost was given, so I can now get what we call prime cost. And to get prime cost, I'm just going to add those two amounts, which will give me 1,296,900. After I have my prime cost, then I come and I add my factory overheads. Remember, I'm adding all of these amounts. Add factory overhead cost. And we just calculated that one, which was 570,650. And it will give me total production cost, which is 1,867,550. Okay. Now I'll come and then I'll add in my work in process. So my work in process at the beginning was not given. Okay. We're given 0 actually. It is given, which is 0. So I'll come in then I'll say plus work in process at the beginning. My work in process at the beginning is 0 rands. So I would then have 1,867,550. And then I will subtract my work in process at the end. And my work in process at the end is 235,500 in brackets, which would therefore give me 1,632,050. 1,632,050. Dear learners, let us go for an ad break, and I'll see you shortly. Welcome back, dear learners, from the ad break. We have a question here with us, and we are required to calculate the cost of raw materials that was wasted. In order for you to do that, you have to understand that it requires 1.2 meters of fabric to make one t-shirt. So, if it requires 1.2 meters of fabric to make one t-shirt, and we have produced how many t-shirts? We have produced 15,000 t-shirts. So you see that multiply by 15,000 t-shirts. That would now give you 18,000 meters. This is the amount of fabric that we should have used. However, we have used 18,900. So we say 18,900, which we have used, minus the 18,000 that we should have used. We have wasted 900 meters. Now, if you want the cost, because these are meters, remember we calculated the average price per meter. So we say the 900 multiply by 47 rand, and then it will give you your 42,300. This is the cost of the raw materials that were wasted. Again, there are several ways in which you could have used to get this figure, but this was one of the simplest ways to get this particular figure. Let's go on to the next question. It says, Mark is concerned about the increase in the cost of raw materials over the financial year. Provide 2 strategies that Mark can use to address the problem of wastage. Number 1, improve the training of factory workers. That is very important, because once you train your employees to become efficient, then wastage is reduced. Use cutting patterns, some call them stencils, all right, and cutting technology, that is cutting machines, okay? Use material of a better quality. When you use better quality material, therefore wastage is reduced. Regular servicing or maintaining of machines, that will also assist in reducing wastage. Use cuts-off effectively for related products such as caps or hoodies. So whenever material has been cut off and we cannot make a t-shirt out of that, that material can still be used for other related products. Pay incentives or bonuses for minimizing wastage to employees. That will encourage them to be efficient and not waste materials, because they look forward to getting an incentive or a bonus. Let's go on to the next question. It says, the business manufactures light bulbs. Richard Smith, the CEO, intended to reduce the production cost of Orion bulbs due to technology changes and to introduce new starlet bulb by setting up a new factory. Required. Do a calculation to confirm that the break-even point of 149,145 units for Orion is correct. So the examiner can come and say, do a calculation to confirm, or the examiner can say, calculate the break-even point. These are all one and the same thing. So you can do a calculation to confirm, or you can actually calculate the break-even point. Now, let us see, here's the information that we're provided with. Now we'll do a calculation to confirm that that break-even point is correct. In order for you to do that, remember the formula to calculate break-even point. It is your total fixed cost over your contribution per unit. Contribution per unit is selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So we come here and then we now say, how do I get my total fixed cost? Here, remember, we are calculating for the Orion bulbs. So we're going to come to the Orion bulbs in 2023. And then we want our total fixed cost, which is your 2,982,900. 2,982,900. And I divide that by my selling price per unit. So my selling price per unit is 46. And then I subtract my variable cost per unit. And my variable cost per unit is 26 minus 26. And it will give me my break-even point, which is 149,145. Remember, we're doing that to confirm this break-even point. The next question then says, identify and explain 2 cost items with figures that may have contributed to the increase in the cost of production per unit. Provide a reason in each case. Note that the current inflation rate is at 7%. Okay, so 2 costs that may have contributed to the increase in the cost of production per unit. Number 1, when you look at your direct labor cost per unit, all right, when you look at your direct labor cost per unit, it has increased from 6 Rand 70. Okay, so your direct labor cost has increased from 6 Rand 70 to 11 Rand 20 there. it has increased by 450, that is by 67.2%. That will contribute to the increase in the cost of production per unit. Okay. And then provide a reason. The reason why our direct labor cost will increase: number one, poor supervision. Secondly, excessive overtime. These are two of the major contributors to an increase in direct labor cost: poor supervision and an excessive overtime. The next one, factory overhead cost. Let's come and look at our factory overhead cost. You see that your factory overhead cost has increased from 11 Rand 64 per unit to 14 Rand 20 over there, by 2 Rand 56, that is by 22%. So your factory overhead cost will have contributed to the increase in production cost per unit. We are now going to look at the reasons that would have caused that to happen. Okay? Here are the reasons why the factory overhead cost would have increased: diseconomies of scale. And the second one, a drop in production while the factory overhead cost remains constant. That would have been the second reason why our production cost per unit would have increased. Dear learners, we'll now go for an ad break, and I'll see you shortly. Welcome back, dear learners. Before the ad break, we did some interesting calculations. Here is what we have covered already. Here are some keywords and language. We have spoken on fixed cost. These are costs that do not change with the level of production, such as rent or salaries. Then we have variable cost, costs that vary with the level of production, like raw materials. And then we have factory overhead cost, the indirect cost incurred during the production process that cannot be directly traced to a specific product. Here are some critical common errors that you need to watch out for as you prepare for your final exam. For further exam practice, you should look at some of these past exam papers, as they will assist you in preparing well for the exam that is coming. Dear learners, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.